It's fair to say we're frustrated and we're angered by these punitive and reckless tariffs. We know fully it's going to impact workers on both sides of the borders.
A tariff move that was supposed to make Canada back down turned out to flip the script entirely. So why, after Trump raised steel tariffs to 50%, did Canada stay quiet yet still manage to throw America's supply chains into chaos and push prices up day by day? On June 4th, the Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian steel from 25% to 50% under Section 232, citing national security. In response, Canada quietly imposed export quotas. Any volume beyond the 2024 total, 6.6 million tons, would face an extra 50% tax. This clever move had a real impact. Canada supplies about 25% of all U.S. imported steel, and any shift ripples through American industry. For American businesses and consumers, this sudden reduction of steel meant prices spiked nearly overnight. Hot-rolled coil steel used widely in cars, appliances, and buildings jumped from $860 to $910 per ton in one day, a 6% rise. If you work in construction, a coil once priced at $300 could leap to $318 or more, meaning thousands of extra dollars just for basic supplies. Major U.S. manufacturers felt the squeeze immediately. With coil steel at $10 per ton, the highest price of 2025 companies warned costs could rise further if Canadian supply stays tight. Automakers like Ford and GM estimated that production costs per vehicle might add $1,500 to $2,000. Practically, a Ford F-150 that listed around $40,000 could easily approach $42,000, even with no extra features. Construction, agriculture, warehousing, any business using steel felt impact. Projects in states like Texas, Michigan, or Ohio faced delays, scaled down plans, or higher prices. If you're building a home or factory, expect quotes to jump by a few $1,000s within weeks, all because of rising steel costs. While U.S. tariffs aim to protect domestic production, Canada chose long-term strength. The government unveiled a $1 billion Canadian Clean Steel Fund to support factories shifting to low-emissions electric arc furnace technology. They also mandated that at least 60% of steel used in national clean energy projects like hydropower, CO2 pipelines, or wind turbines must be domestically produced. A highlight. Algoma Steel in Ontario is investing 880 million Canadian dollars to build 2 new electric arc furnaces starting July 2025. When complete, they'll cut CO2 emissions by 70% and boost Canada's steel self-sufficiency. For people living in Toronto or Calgary, domestic steel now shows steadier pricing, and big construction projects move ahead without sudden cost hikes. Meanwhile, in the US, everyday goods with heavy steel used like gym equipment, shelving, or even aluminum soda cans are quietly rising in price. A soda can that was 75 cents may soon cost 90 cents.
As we just heard, the U.S. president railed against Canadian dairy and lumber industries, claiming the U.S. is being, quote, ripped off.
Once a symbol of American agriculture, the dairy industry now falters right at home. Rather than being shipped off to Europe, Asia, or premium supermarkets, American milk is being dumped near unused farms. Meanwhile, Canada speaks softly but acts decisively and is quietly capturing global market share. Since mid-2025, Canada slapped import duties as high as 300% on U.S. milk that exceeds a small quota under its supply management system designed to protect domestic producers. As a result, over 90% of American milk exported to Canada has been halted. Trucks of U.S. milk have turned back, leaving millions of liters stuck in cold storage in states like Wisconsin, Vermont, and Idaho. Despite falling prices down over 30% in July, demand vanished as consumers grew wary or dismissed it as return surplus. If you've seen 1-gallon cartons of whole milk drop from $4.20 to $2.90 at stores like Walmart or Kroger, that's not good news. It's a sign that the market is in crisis. With exports to Canada blocked, U.S. dairy entered a downward spiral. Production continued, but buyers disappeared. According to USDA, nearly 1,700 smaller dairy farms risked closure in Q2 2025. America once held 18% of the global dairy market. But by mid-2025, that plunged to under 9%, a two-decade low. This crisis goes beyond farmers. Rural communities that rely on dairy are feeling the pinch. Schools cutting lunches, local stores left empty, banks tightening credit, and jobs vanishing. If you once lived in a small town anchored by a dairy plant, now you may see that plant shuttered, hiring signs removed, and an entire community in limbo. It's not just Canada. Key global partners are turning away U.S. dairy. The European Union added U.S. milk to a retaliatory tariff list, covering $72 billion in exports. Japan and Australia tightened import standards, starting June 2025. The issue isn't quality, it's labeling transparency. Many countries require clear disclosure of growth hormone, RBST, antibiotic use, or farm source labels not mandatory in the U.S. Trucks of milk and cheese are being returned. Much of this excess supply is sold domestically at deep discounts, 1 gallon for as low as $1.80 instead of $3.50. But the real cost is trust. Americans are asking, if others won't buy this milk, what's in it? Confidence in the U.S. dairy industry is eroding. While the U.S. grapples with oversupply and trade retaliation, Canada quietly expands its global dairy footprint through solid planning, supply control, and farm support. Its supply management system limits oversupply, bans growth hormones and excess antibiotics, and ensures full traceability from farm to table. Exported Canadian dairy clearly states these standards, which many importing countries now expect. As a result, Canada has gained market share in Japan, South Korea, the EU, and even the Middle East. Canadian dairy export revenues surpassed 4.2 billion Canadian dollars in the first half of 2025, up nearly 18% from the same period in 2024. While U.S. families shop for those discounted cheese packs or milk jugs, they may not realize local dairy farmers are shutting operations, halting milking, or selling off farms. If this continues, the U.S. dairy sector faces more than lost markets. It risks losing the next generation of farmers once raised on its own family milk.
Industry, businesses, Canadians, they are anxious, and they want the right kind of resolution. They want a deal that makes sense for Canada, that makes sense for Canadian business, for Canadian workers.
They used to deliver fresh milk every morning and form the rhythm of whole towns. But now, many small dairy farms in the U.S. are quietly shutting down. No protests, no headlines, just empty shelves where familiar milk used to be. Why did an industry that once saw 20% export growth end up with thousands of farmers losing their livelihood? What's really going on between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico that turned milk into a weapon in the silent trade chess game? In 2024, Mexico was the largest market for U.S. dairy exports, making up nearly 1/3 of the total value. By USDA data, Canada ranked second, but with barriers. Under Canada's supply management system, they impose quotas and harsh tariffs, sometimes near 298.5% on milk imports that exceed limits. A Cornell University study published in March 2025 says Canada has started some concessions to expand access for U.S. milk under USMCA, but so far only on paper, with no big changes in actual import volume. If you buy milk from Mexico or Canada today, you may soon see fewer options and rising prices. For example, a box of Mexican imported cheese that used to cost around $5 is now frequently priced near $6, thanks to supply instability and shifting tariff rules. By Q1 2025, U.S. dairy exports reached about $714 million, up 20% from the year before, according to the Dairy Export Council. But volume rose just 0.4%, so most of that gain came from higher prices, not more milk shipped. Despite those figures, many small farms keep closing. In 2024 alone, 1,420 dairies shut down, about 5% of the total nationwide. Smaller farms are squeezed out by high production costs and limited market access, while large industrial farms survive thanks to automation and scale. If you live in regions like Wisconsin, Vermont, or Idaho, you may have noticed your local grocery store no longer stocks the fresh milk you used to buy at around $4.20 per gallon. Instead, you now see cheaper industrial versions for about $3.60, less consistent in taste and origin. A Café en Laconia, New Hampshire reported switching away from local organic milk, drawing customer complaints over flavor changes. In 2024, the U.S. produced over 226 billion pounds of milk, around 102 million tons near historical highs. Average milk yield per cow is nearly 6 times what it was in the year 1924, showing how much mechanization has increased. The United States usually exports processed dairy products. Cheese worth $2.4 billion, non-fat dry milk valued at $2 billion, and lactose and whey totaling $1.9 billion rather than fresh or fluid milk. Canada operates a very different model. Through supply management, they set output ceilings, guarantee minimum prices for farmers, and slap heavy tariffs up to near 300% on any imports that exceed quotas. Farms are strictly regulated from feed and housing to final milk quality. This system has earned Canada strong trust among global buyers, including Mexico and European markets, despite a much smaller total volume than the U.S. For American consumers, that means it's easier to find inexpensive cheese and powdered milk, but much harder to get high-quality, imported fresh milk. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Canadian milk, though slightly more expensive, is often preferred for its consistency and traceable standards. This shift is making it harder for U.S. dairy farmers to compete and turning tariff policy into a double-edged sword.
Over 70% of our hogs are exported, and we lose an export market. It causes disaster in the price. So this is fabulous. It's fabulous.
Everybody will be celebrating tonight, I'm sure. Yeah, wonderful.
Tons of American beef are now sitting in cold storage with no buyers while on supermarket shelves. The price per pound keeps creeping up. So what happened? How did Asia turn its back on U.S. beef in just a few weeks, clearing the way for Canada to step in? And why are American shoppers paying more, even as farmers are taking heavy losses? In 2025, American beef is quietly being pushed off the menu across Asia, especially in key markets like Japan and South Korea, which together accounted for nearly 60% of total U.S. beef exports last year. According to the USDA, exports to China and Hong Kong are down a staggering 67.7% year over year. Japan and South Korea have also scaled back orders significantly. In March alone, weekly beef exports to Asia dropped to just over 50 tons, the lowest in years. While the U.S. scrambles, Canada is moving quickly to fill the gap. With a more modern logistics system, upgraded cold storage facilities, and strong source tracking policies, Canadian beef is emerging as a preferred alternative. Campaigns like Raised Without Hormones and No Antibiotics ever line up with increasingly strict standards in Asia, especially in Japan and South Korea, where food safety and transparency are major selling points. For American shoppers, this global shift hits close to home. As international sales dry up, U.S. meat processors face tighter margins and less room to absorb costs. Meanwhile, more Canadian beef is coming into American supermarkets at a higher price. That box of steaks that used to cost $40, it might now be $46 and climbing. Over the past 5 years, Canada has quietly poured hundreds of millions into upgrading its beef supply chain from ranch to retail. Ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert have been expanded to handle frozen goods more efficiently. Cold storage hubs in Alberta and Saskatchewan now feature precision temperature systems to protect quality during global shipping. Canada Beef, the industry's marketing arm, rolled out a traceability program allowing each cut of meat to be traced back to its farm. Labels like Raised Without Hormones are now common on export packages. This makes it easier for Canadian beef to pass strict import inspections in Japan, South Korea, and Singapore markets that value food safety and hormone-free products. For Asian consumers, that means peace of mind without much extra cost. But for Americans, if this trend continues, it could hit domestic prices hard. One supermarket chain in California that used to buy U.S. beef at $6 per pound is now sourcing from Alberta at $7.20 per pound. That price difference gets passed right to you at checkout. American cattle ranchers are under growing pressure. According to the USDA, U.S. beef exports are projected to drop by nearly 10% in 2025, down to roughly 2.6 to 2.7 billion pounds. Meanwhile, imports are expected to rise 12%, topping 5 billion pounds mainly from Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil, losing long-standing markets like Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam means more unsold product at home, and a glut that drives prices down for farmers, even as costs keep rising. Processing plants in Texas, Nebraska, In Kansas have cut back operations. Some have shut down temporarily, with hundreds of workers laid off. According to the American Meat Institute, small and mid-sized farms are losing buyers, forced to scale back or sell cattle early just to stay afloat. At the same time, prices at the grocery store keep rising. Ground beef now averages $6.10